a second. So,
and most cars will have a sort of magic window that they suddenly really work in, and it's finding that, and it's like when a golfer hits, or a tennis player or a cricket player, you know, has that sweet spot on the bat. It's learning how to harness that all the time rather than accidentally come across it, which us sort of amateur hackers do.
Yeah.
And it's finding that spot and staying in that.
Yeah, the engineers have got so many data traces available to them. They'll find something which, you know, they'll make a step forward, find a little break, and then from that point forward, they'll try and use all the data channels to try and achieve that same roll stiffness across the front axle and rear axle, and they'll find out what the driver's like, and then you've got that as a step forward. So the next time you go to a circuit, you start with that roll center basis, and then you can learn from that as well.
And then on the other hand, you can lead yourself down alleys. Tom Chilton saying now that they've gone back on his Chevrolet to settings they used last year, the advances that they thought they were going to make this year by adjusting stuff didn't work, and have just sort of either not worked for the way he needs to drive the car, the way he needs it to be set up to work with it, or he's not been able to drive it the way that it should theoretically work best. Now he's got settings on before, he feels better in the car and is actually producing more speed. And that's an odd thing that an engineer has to do as well. You know, you might have this graph and trace and slide rule and everything that says this is empirically better, but if your driver can't deal with it, something that he can deal with will actually be faster. And that's counterintuitive, and that's all part of the engineer's genius as well.
Yeah, it's not necessarily just the theory that makes it go faster.
Rear suspension changes going on here. Can't see whose car that is. That's the rear axis, Gabrielli's, I might have guessed. That's the rear access panel to the suspension setup in the flat floor. And we saw them working fast on this car in Hungary when he was knocked out of race one in an accident, and his car was out of parc ferme. He was going to have to start from the pit lane or back of the grid, whichever it was, I forget, and they were making last-minute changes. I talked to him in the lift this morning in the hotel. I said, what did you do there that made your car suddenly quicker? Because in the second race in Hungary, Norby, who won, was the fastest car. Gabrielli set the second fastest lap. He said, no, in Hungary, the car was quite quick the whole time, but in qualifying, their problem is it's not any quicker than it is in the race.
Oh.
So there's Mar pulled over on the side. Now well, I thought that was pit lane exit, so he's just doing a practice start. That's the practice start box into turn one. Useful place to have it, into a blind, flat-out turn one.
Yeah, you need that, don't you?
Yeah.
Very, very reliant on the trust of your engineers on the pit wall to make sure nothing's coming.
Sort of a bit of fifth-lane driving there, really, isn't it?
It is a little bit, isn't it? Not kicking up quite as much dust as you can on the road.
Not enough, I think. No, under-ambitious.
It looked a lot like what they were doing on that Honda, was changing the roll centre.
Yes.
Which is where you'll move the height that the arms on the rear suspension are mounted, and the higher up they are, the higher the roll centre. I mean, I don't know if they're raising or lowering it, but can make a massive, massive difference to the handling characteristics of the car. It is, perhaps that's where they're finding things, you know, if they're moving things up and down, and they've obviously got that access panel for quick access to make these changes.
Citroën spending an awful lot of time working on their starts because they still have not worked out how to get these cars off the line universally well. See with the black rubber knob, that's the normal gear shifter. Closer to the camera, there are a pair of levers. One is a manual handbrake, the other thinner one that's slightly closer to the driver is an adaptation they've been using this year, and that holds the clutch position as well. So you're holding the brake, holding the clutch, and the driver then just holds his foot on the gas, it sits on the limiter, and you release the whole lot all in one go. Still not quite getting the launches to be universally good. Usually, two of the cars will make a good getaway, two won't, and yet they're all using the same theoretically unoverridable, should be perfect system. Hear the tyre scrub there from the understeer in the slower corners, and that's an indication again of how dirty the track is. Is the tyre is just scrubbing across, because basically it's sort of on a layer of sand over the tarmac.
Yeah, you can hear it grip, release, grip, release, grip, release, which is what you're getting that chattering noise from, and it's not what you need. Yeah,
at least it's not his transmission like our Ford Focus.
No, that's not getting us home.
That'll get us everywhere.
That's another new system that the Citroën has, certainly since the last time I watched it. Was you know, they had that silver system where they pulled the lever into the side.
That's the same deal. This is just an adaptation of that. It's just not a flat alley panel. They've now sort of made it more tubular and so on. And they obviously refused to tell us what it did, and said, no, I'm not telling you. And then they made shocking starts, so actually we came to the conclusion they did absolutely nothing for them, but that's what it is.
That looked like a proper fire there. Maybe it's just a bit of rubber, but
no, it's just a bit of unburnt fuel.
It looked like it was coming from on top of the exhaust. That's got a lot of understeer. Rydell's really up against it, and I think I wouldn't be surprised to see him come in now.
Yeah,
do
so
something radical.
Rear roll centre change. He needs to do what Gabrielli's doing, I think, which is essentially raising the rear a little bit so it's more on tippy toes and it tends to slide into roll oversteer more easily. And what you want there is not a car that snaps brutally sideways like it's a Mark II Escort on the gravel, but one that turns, that the back is more likely to slide, and that makes it easier for the front to get round the corner. They call it rotation in the trade.
Yeah, well, it's lifting the weight of the car slightly higher on the rear. So if you imagine having a pendulum, if you imagine a cross section of the rear axle, if you had a pendulum sat in the middle of the axle, by raising the ride height, it's almost the extreme version. It would be like putting a big pendulum up through the roof with a weight on the top of it. You know, that's the extreme version of it, obviously, but that will inevitably open the rear easily.
It's trying to induce a little bit more oversteer so that there's less understeer, basically. So as you turn the front wheel, the back tries to turn a little bit more. Jose Maria Lopez, fastest first sector.
Boys, that's exactly why Honda are so strong here, isn't it? We've seen in the past couple of years that the shorter wheelbase cars are rotating easier, and therefore they are better around this Moscow Raceway, where it's all about turning and there's less influence on having a strong motor, where we saw obviously the Nordschleife Citroen flying down the straights. Getting that car to rotate, getting it to turn and not have too much understeer, it seems to be Honda's forte. And that's why they were strong here last year, but as we said at the start of the programme, they made some strategic errors and some on-track problems. They are really, really hoping to have potentially their first win of the year and fight for the top 5 here in Moscow.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's we've always seen. Even the older spec of car, they were always fast here. It's got to be related to the shorter wheelbase of the car. There's a lot of changes of direction, so that short wheelbase will definitely help it kind of stay on its nose and react quicker.
And that should help the Lada as well, because it's not as long a platform as the Chevrolet here or the Citroen. Those are longer 3-box saloons, aren't they? Whereas the slightly shorter wheelbase of the Honda and the Lada Vesta, the hatchbacks, gives them that little bit more rotation in the corners. And as you said, I mean, apart from the long back straight and the front straight, it is all twisty-turny. When you drive around this track, you're constantly turning, and you can really feel the weight moving around in the car. And the more you can get your wheelbase to help you with that. So here see Tom Coronel locking up left, right and centre.
The other thing that plays into Honda's advantage this weekend is that whilst they have been given 20 kilos extra ballast over the first couple of races, so therefore they're only 40 kilos lighter than Citroen rather than 60. Chevrolet have been given 40 kilos of weight ballast, so they're 20 kilos heavier, and that's thanks to Hugo Vallant being so fast in qualifying and in the races. So Hugo's individual effort in the last couple of races and those starring performances, especially in qualifying, have actually punished the whole of the Chevrolet grid. Therefore, he said, definitely no top 5 for me this weekend in qualifying, and it's going to be difficult, and we're going to aim for the top 10. And Honda's, therefore, will automatically move up that field.
Well, that's entirely possible. Hugo, of course, has so far produced great speed in qualifying. He has been in the top 5 almost everywhere, but has had several accidents in the races, and it's just not happened. And actually, his starts from the front row have always been very disappointing for him as for everybody else, because there's a lot of potential there that's not quite yet solidified. Jaap van Lagen in his Lada, currently in 9th place, ahead of Thiago Montero in the timesheets. Gabriele Tarquini's Honda right behind him. Thiago Montero's Honda, in fact, right behind him. Montero in 10th fastest. Hugo Vallant is 11th at the moment, so he's sort of there or thereabouts where he needs to be in qualifying. The problem with qualifying is it's tough getting into the top 5, but at least you know what the target is. What's really hard is trying to judge 8th, 9th, 10th without accidentally being 11th or 12th. Because 11th and 12th is purgatory, 8th, 9th and 10th is sort of bliss for race 2, even if it's hard work in race 1.
Montero's moving up the grid there as well.
5th quickest lap from him. Quim Ma, first time ever a Chinese driver had won an FIA World Championship race, was last year in Moscow. Tarquini fastest from Lopez, Muller and Huff is fourth quickest. Not anymore, Lopez has just banged in a fourth fastest time, but Rob Huff going very quickly in his Lada Vesta.
You can see how much more planted the cars are with this new platform as well from the old cars. That brake there, that big braking bump as you turn in, we're used to seeing cars turning in over that and backing into the corners, but we saw it a little bit last year with the Citroen, but they seem to have calmed it down again for this year.
I'm saying Nicky Katzberg has been here before. I think he's doing quite decent. But again, you can hear, you know, the cars all scrubbing away those front tyres.
Right, so let's talk about Nicky Katzberg then and jumping into this Lada. Absolutely no testing in the car. His first taster of the car was in testing yesterday, 0.2 slower than Jaap van Lagen. The reason he's in the car, Viktor Shapovalov does say that he spent a lot of time trying to find drivers, trying to persuade drivers into that seat. He did speak to a couple of Russian drivers, specifically Ladigin, who races an SMP LMP2 car, but he's too focused on something happening next weekend. I don't know what that is. So he couldn't get a Russian driver, and then was sort of basically running out of time and struggling. So phoned up Jaap and said to Jaap, who do you reckon would be available? And Jaap went next door, knocked on the door, and Nicky Katzberg said yes. No, as you say, he didn't. McGann Trophy, no real experience of front-wheel drivers in a way, but the GT aspect of his experience is helping him understand the aero demands of these new cars.
Yeah. Well, actually, the McGann Trophy cars were quite aero-dependent as well, but at a different level. But as you're right, actually, the critical thing for Nicky is getting used to front-wheel drive. And we had this from Sabine Schmitz at the Nordschleife. She said these cars are particularly hard to drive, and this is a woman who knows the Nordschleife intimately, has been driving it all her life and is used to 500, 600 horsepower cars. But she said with no traction control, no ABS, front-wheel drive, it makes them very, very tricky to find the limit. And so, yeah, when you're coming in from a rear-wheel drive experience, which is what he has, it is a very different way of going racing.
And Harry, as a driver, that confidence of knowing where the rear is, where the front is, in a GT car where you've got the get-out-of-jail-free cars, as Matt was calling them in the Nordschleife, with the ABS, with the traction control, surely not having those things and therefore being slightly nervous about what the car's going to do underneath you, especially a car you've never driven before, you're going to lose a huge amount of lap time.
Yeah, you'd think so. I mean, there's a big thing on the brakes with front-wheel drive touring car racing. You need to be very, very committed on it, and it requires, obviously all racing requires a big stab on the brake, but with a front-wheel drive, if you stab it too hard, especially with no ABS, you lock the front axle up and you're going straight on into whatever's in front of you. That's not an issue generally with a rear-wheel drive car, because you lock a front which you can recover from, which, you know, like I say, this is a totally unrecoverable situation if you lock a front well, if you do it well enough in a front-wheel drive car. And without the ABS, obviously, it's all down to modulation through your foot, so that's a big step, and it's a big learning curve, understanding how hard you can stab the brake pedal and whereabouts you need to do it.
Well, what we're seeing from him at the moment as he follows Hugo Vallant is he's certainly not worried about corner speed. He's got plenty of that, but as you say, you can only go as fast as you can go slow, if you like, because if you know the second most important thing on the car after the accelerator pedal is the brake pedal and how you work it. And in these cars, as you alluded to, even more so than in a rear driver. Into the pit lane comes Tom Chilton. On my timing screen, what was his best lap? 140.1, so 1.1 seconds away at the moment. Got full HD pictures on screen and a 1965 World Cup from somewhere or other spec timing screen that I can barely read even with binoculars. 1:39.0 is the fastest lap at the moment from Gabriele Tarquini. Just to remind you that the qualifying record is 1:38.6, so only 4 tenths away from that. Lap record in a race, 1:40.1, so we're already inside the existing lap record, and it's only first official free practice.
They're doing a lot to the rear of this car, aren't they? There's a rear wind change we've seen there, which would obviously be would go hand in hand with the rear ride centre, roll centre.
Well, Gabrielli fastest at the moment. He's done 6 laps compared to 10 of Norbert Michelis and 9 of Thiago Monteiro. So they've been in the pits for 3 or 4 laps. But so he has been out then since we saw him last. He must have been, mustn't he? He can't have been in there for 10 minutes. And one of the advantages now of having Norby going so quickly in the Zengo car is that what you need to be doing if you're Honda and Yas is working on 2 different setups with your own cars, the Castrol cars, and then trying to compare it with something different that Zengo are doing, so you get 3 different stabs in each session at a setup change or whatever. You know, that's obviously what Citroën are doing. With 4 cars, you'll go out with 4 different setups and work on 4 different sets of things, and you'll pre-plan it, Harry, so that you don't replicate on 2 of your drivers something that you're trying to find out.
No, and sometimes you'll find one little tweak one may help. It may give you 0.2 of a second in one corner, and then you can overlay that with the data from the other 3 sets of data that you have and decide, make a, you know, an overall group decision as to what's going to benefit the team.
And then what you do is you give it to your other drivers in the next session so they can either validate it or go, oh no, God, that's horrible, let's not do that, please. It might work for him, but it's not working for me or any of us. I'd say, you know, when you get to your race setup and your qualifying setup, each of the drivers with his own engineer then has to cherry pick the right bits for them, for their setup, for what their driver needs out of this sort of mass of information. And that's, you know, it's a good thing to have the information, it's a hard thing to use the information.
Yeah, I mean, when you watch Loeb, he obviously drives with a lot of turning oversteer, so something that works for him probably won't work for the other guys. I mean, it's visible on TV, so that must, you know, that will translate to a big difference in driving style, so he will require something different from the car.
Data sharing was something that we always used to see with Chevrolet back in the old days, but when Muller moved to Citroën and they were coming up with the whole concept of the team, the first year, so last year, they did not share data between the drivers. The engineers shared a little bit, but it wasn't an open book like it was at Chevrolet until about mid-season, when Pachito had such a huge advantage that the drivers, Ivan and Seb, needed some more information. And suddenly the rules changed at Citroën, and the open book then happened, and Pachito was still able to continue to be fastest, but that philosophy has now rolled into this year, and they do have an open book with setup for the 4 cars that they run. But it was interesting that they had to change that mid-season last year.
I wonder if that was because they were so confident going into last year. They knew that they were going to, Citroën would win the championship, and perhaps that would be a different way of thinking of the engineering team, coming up with different solutions without them all being led down the same path. And then mid-season they'll probably all reconvene, work out what's worked for them, and then work out what the fastest solutions are.
Work out how on earth Pachito was just so fast.
Yeah, I think going in, Lopez was a kind of nice marketing addition who probably would do very well and back up the lead drivers, which is not sort of the way it worked out, so yes. But it does seem entirely nonsensical that going into a brand new form of motorsport that you've never been in before, you would not pool your information. I mean, that seems like a total and utter waste of time and effort to me. Lopez showing just how grubby it is still offline. Even the best get caught out here. It is very dirty offline. In fact, as he skated off in one of the other corners, you saw Ivan go zooming by him. Lopez still second quickest, ahead of Muller and Loeb.
I think that when we saw Lopez going off the second time, I think that was just dirt from that first off, you know, to the next corner. And
And we should be using the word zooming more often.
Zooming, absolutely.
Absolutely, that's the word of the weekend. Ignore that middle split, by the way. That is definitely not working properly.
No, I was looking at that. Everybody has been about 2 seconds faster in the second segment, so there's definitely something wrong there. So 2 seconds up and plus 1-1 at the end of the lap. Rob Huff 1.1 seconds away, is 6th fastest. However, that was his best lap, a 1:40.18 last lap. And yet that was all green, and yet his best lap is a 1:39.7. So, shall I ignore the timing screen entirely, do you think?
We have the fastest in the first sector as Pachito Lopez, the fastest in the second sector is Ivan Muller, and the fastest in the third sector, Sebastian Loeb. but putting his sectors together, Tarquini leads the field.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's
Well, on our timing screen, we just saw Rob setting green sectors all the way through the lap. However, according to the end result, it was a 140.1. His fastest is a 139.7. So I'm going to just ignore the timing screen now. We'll just look at the pylon and hope that at least they've got the order right.
And then go and smash some heads in.
No. Again, you know, I think it may be too late in the year for that, probably. It does, however, leave the teams with a little bit of a problem. You sort of almost want Betty Hill on the pit wall with a stopwatch, don't you? Just so you've got your own timing. Great turn-in shot of Tom Coronel there with the rear wheel. That was proper 205 GTI cornering. That was a good 6 inches, 8 inches off the ground. That was a cracking shot.
yeah, it was good. That was.
I want to see that one again in super slow-mo and the melt reel at the end of the rollout. Stefano D'Aste, things I've learned already this weekend. Stefano D'Aste used to race motorcycles. Did you know that?
I never knew that.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
His former teammate was some curly-haired little youngster called Valentino Rossi,
Who's
something. Never went on to race cars. Don't know what happened to him. And incidentally, by the way, anybody who's into motorcycles, Rossi coming back this year, what a story that is. D'Aste again, finding dirt offline. When are we going to see a Munich car out again? We need another. We need more Rennie Munich cars out.
Well, there is a contract.
Yeah, there
pending,
are
isn't there?
more Chevrolets out, and we need more. Or there are more Chevrolets. We need more Chevrolets out.
I
just
think
because
we're
it's more
expecting
cars.
to see a second Munich Motorsport car for either Ricard or Slovakia.
Well, it'd be nice if it was both, because that's 2 races in 7 days. That would be quite good.
And it was
Or 4
almost
races in
sorted
7
at the
days.
start of the year as well. But as yet, there hasn't been any formal announcement as to who that driver is. And in fact, when I was told the driver's name, I hadn't heard of him and couldn't say his name properly.
So the same as Nicky Katzberg then.
Yeah, who everyone's calling Nick Katzberg.
Well, he was always Nicky Katzberg in the McGann Trophy, but he may have become Nick Katzberg. Oh dear.
Oh, that's not gone well, has it?
Well, at least it's not a bloke. At least it is a girl with a top knot, not some noncy hipster.
Yeah, true.
No offence, all noncy hipsters watching. Gabriele Tarquini still fastest as he comes back down pit road, so they're having more of a tinker.
And the graphic on the top says the checkered flag is out.
Do we believe it?
No, yes, I do believe it.
Excellent.
I've seen the actual fabric one as well.
Good. Believe your eyes and nothing of what you read.
Do we know if D'Aste has the updated aero kit now and the updated engine for this round?
Run, Ben, run like the wind.
We'll get back to you on that one for
Yeah.
FP2. There's a teaser for FP2.
Coming soon, does D'Aste have the updated aero?
The Chevys look like they're picking a rear wheel up much higher than pretty much everything else now. You know, the Hondas historically always used to have that rear wheel dangling well in the air.
Well, what do you have to do? We talked about this earlier on. What do you have to do to get a longer wheelbase car to rotate? You have to make the rear move more. So they've stiffened up the front, and they've obviously stiffened up the rear a lot more, so it picks up the wheel a lot more. But it means they've raised the rear roll centre, and so it is rolling more at the rear, so it's more likely to pick up. I mean, that's the thing that you used to get even as a road driver in a nice 205, or especially in a 205, but also in a Golf GTI. You know you're pressing on when you can feel the back just starting to slide a little bit because it's picking the wheel up.
Yeah, I think, don't those modern Ford Focuses do that as well now?
Yeah, the ST, by all accounts, has all of that sort of feeling, well, almost all that sort of feeling.
And the Nissan Note as well.
Nissan Note, now there is a car that you can pedal, apparently.
And the engine works better in X4 and also in X5.
Okay, interesting. One of the issues that is sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which nobody really wants to talk about very much, and we don't whipped to death is that the Hondas don't feel they've got the engine power that Citroën have. And actually, John, I might have a word with Stuart Carey and see how they feel the Chevrolet engine compares to where Citroën are. Gabriele Tarquini, fastest from Jose Maria Lopez, Ivan Muller, Sebastian Loeb. And no sign there of Mehdi Benani or Qinghua Ma. Ma 10th fastest. Benani, who had a really good weekend in Russia last year, only 12th quickest. Ricard Rydal in 13th fastest. First time in the car since time immemorial, and first time here at Russia. That's a good run from Ricard. Fastest lap 140.6 to Gabriele's 139.0. Now, to say, yeah, you're 1.6 away, that's a good lap. Normally, I wouldn't say that to Ricard, but actually, that's a good place to start from, definitely. Well, let's get down and hear from Gabriele Tarquini. Alex Legui is with him in the pit lane.
A fantastic start to the weekend then, you guys. Gabriele, what's it like out there?
Yeah, the car likes this track, especially my car since yesterday. Very good to drive, like last year. I don't know if it's me or the car, but it seems that the characteristic of this track match really well with the characteristic of our car. Top speed is not very important, so I still optimistic. Like yesterday is not qualifying, unfortunately. I know that everybody improve for qualifying, especially with the qualifying modes. But I'm still optimistic.
It's not you or the car, it's the volleyball from last night.
I think so. I gained maybe at least 2 or 3 tenths with volleyball.
Yeah, I reckon it definitely helped you. Well, why is this particularly good for Honda here?
It's very twisty. I mean, it's sure that speed is important in every track, but it's just the last part there is a very long straight, but the rest is very Mickey Mouse, change of direction. And I think car likes cornering. I mean, the chassis is very good balance, front and rear. Not a lot of turn-in oversteer. I saw some other car suffering a lot of turn-in oversteer. Our car seems very good.
And hopefully that will continue for the weekend.
I hope.
Well, it's controlling that rear roll that is so critical on a tight and twisty track like this, and clearly the Honda changes direction nicely. Now, you don't get enough of that on some of the fast Grand Prix circuits, but here they've got an opportunity to really shine. And that's what you want in this championship, Harry, is circuits, or cars rather, that have weaknesses as well as strengths. You want them not to perform well in certain circumstances and perform well in others, and that's, that's what gives you a little bit of colour and texture.
That's the beauty of touring car racing, isn't it, I guess, and especially this format where you have such different, varied types of car. We see the Honda struggling on high-speed corners. Obviously, that is different here with lots of low-speed changes of direction, the short wheelbase, the fact that they're obviously controlling the turning oversteer. It's, they've got a nice progressive car underneath them, which, it's nine parts of the battle if you can get that section right, and then that helps the drivers get their head right. And, obviously you've got three fantastic drivers in those Hondas, and I'm sure we'll see some good results this weekend. But it's interesting hearing them talk about the qualifying mode. That's where the cars change their engine maps, and obviously they'll run on higher cambers and they'll kill the tyres a lot more. That is when you really see the true potential of where the cars are really at.
Well, 2 hours now till free practice 2. As you can see on the countdown, it starts at 11 o'clock Russian time, which is 10 Central European, 9 British Summer Time, 0800 GMT. Don't forget you can join us live for that online and follow all the action as well. We'll have a little bit of a ferret round and see what exciting news we can find from the pit lane. And before that, either our truck is on fire or somebody is cooking very close to us, because there's a definite smells like they've got a bratwurst stand right next door, which would be a wonderful thing in itself. So that's it for first free practice. Jose Maria Lopez looking fairly unflustered with life at the moment.